Homeless man reports the greatest difficulties of living on the street. It's hard to bear. Antonio Silva had spent the last 4 years living on the streets of Chicago. And when he finally found the courage to share his experience, his words came out like a long-suppressed confession. At 43 years old, with tired eyes that still gleamed with dignity, Antonio decided to tell the most painful truths about life on the streets, not out of self-pity, but so others could understand. Difficulties that society prefers not to see. People think the worst part of living on the street is not having food or shelter. Antonio began, his voice carrying the bitter wisdom earned through suffering. But that's just the surface. What really breaks you inside are the things nobody talks about, the daily humiliations, the way people stop seeing you as a human being. Antonio had been a respected electrician with his own shop and a stable life, until a series of devastating events. His wife's death in a car accident, followed by depression that cost him his business and savings, led him to the streets. Now, sitting on a park bench in the city center, he was ready to reveal the harshest truths about his new reality. The first thing you lose on the streets isn't your home or your money, Antonio explained, nervously fidgeting with a piece of cardboard. That served as his seat. It's your invisibility. You become invisible to normal people, but at the same time, you become hypervisible to police, to security guards, to anyone who sees you as a problem to be solved. What Antonio was about to share were the brutal realities that most people never consider when they see a homeless person. He would talk about the daily struggle to maintain dignity when society constantly denies it, about survival strategies that go far beyond finding food and shelter, and about the psychological weight of being treated as disposable. I want people to understand, Antonio said, looking directly at his listener. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for understanding. Because the difficulties I face every day are things that could happen to anyone, and they're harder to bear than most people could imagine. The physical discomfort of sleeping on concrete and dealing with hunger was only the beginning of Antonio's struggle. What proved far more devastating was the systematic erosion of his basic human dignity through countless daily encounters that reinforced his new status as a social outcast. The bathroom situation is something nobody talks about, Antonio said, his voice dropping with embarrassment. Try to imagine spending 4 years without regular access to a toilet. Public bathrooms are locked. Businesses won't let you use theirs. And when you finally find one, you're rushed out before you can properly clean yourself. You start to feel like an animal, and people treat you like one. Antonio described the elaborate mental maps he had developed of every public restroom in a 20-block radius, their operating hours, which ones required purchases, and which business owners might show mercy to someone in desperate need. The simple act of using a bathroom, something most people never think about, had become a complex logistical challenge that occupied hours of his day. Personal hygiene becomes almost impossible, Antonio continued. You can't get a job if you smell bad, but you can't stay clean without access to proper facilities. It's a cycle designed to keep you trapped. I've washed myself in gas station, bathrooms, in park fountains, anywhere I could find running water. But there's only so much you can do. The psychological impact of this constant state of uncleanliness was profound. Antonio spoke about how the inability to maintain basic hygiene affected his self-worth and his interactions with others. He could see the disgust in people's eyes, the way they moved away from him, the assumptions they made about his character based on his appearance. I remember being a clean person, Antonio said, his voice thick with emotion. I showered every day, wore clean clothes, took pride in my appearance. When you lose that, you lose part of yourself. You start to believe that maybe you deserve to be treated badly because you look the way you do. As sleep deprivation was another constant torment. Antonio explained how true rest was nearly impossible when you were sleeping in public spaces. Always alert for danger, weather changes, or police who might move you along. He had learned to sleep in shifts, never allowing himself to fall into deep sleep that might leave him vulnerable. "You're always tired," Antonio said. "Not just physically, but mentally exhausted from the constant vigilance. You can't let your guard down, ever. Even when you find a safe place to sleep, part of your mind is always awake, listening for threats. After months of this, you start to feel like you're going crazy." The social isolation that came with homelessness was perhaps the most difficult aspect for Antonio to endure. As someone who had once been part of a community, who had regular customers and friends, the sudden complete social rejection was devastating. "People look through you like you're not there," Antonio said, his voice heavy with hurt. "I'll say good morning to someone I used to know, and they'll pretend they didn't hear me. I understand it. I make them uncomfortable. I remind them that this could happen to them too. But it still hurts every single time." Antonio described the loneliness as a physical pain, an ache that never went away. He spoke about talking to himself just to hear a human voice, about the desperate gratitude he felt when anyone showed him basic kindness or acknowledged his existence. "There's a McDonald's where I sometimes go," Antonio shared. "There's a manager there named Maria who always says hello when she sees me. She doesn't give me food or money. She just acknowledges that I exist. You can't imagine how much that means. It's like she's reminding me that I'm still human." The relationship with other homeless individuals was complex and often fraught with tension. While there was sometimes solidarity and mutual support, there was also competition for resources and territory. Antonio explained how homelessness could bring out both the best and worst in people. "We're all fighting for the same scraps," Antonio said. "The same safe places to sleep, the same sources of food, the same charity resources. Sometimes we help each other, but sometimes we're enemies. The stress of survival can turn decent people into selfish ones. I've seen friendships destroyed over a warm coat or a good sleeping spot. The mental health challenges were constant and overwhelming." Antonio spoke about the depression that clouded every day, the anxiety that made simple tasks feel insurmountable, and the way trauma from street life accumulated over time. "You develop a different kind of trauma," Antonio explained. "Not from one big event, but from thousands of small cruelties. Being moved along by police, being refused service at businesses, being treated like garbage by people who used to respect you. It builds up until you start to believe that maybe you really are worthless." Antonio had watched other homeless individuals succumb to various forms of self-medication, alcohol, drugs, anything to numb the pain of their existence. He had struggled with these temptations himself, understanding how substance abuse could seem like the only escape from an unbearable reality. The weather was a constant enemy that dictated every aspect of Antonio's existence. He had learned to read the sky like a survival expert, understanding that his life could depend on accurately predicting rain, snow, or dangerous temperature changes. "Winter is trying to kill you every day," Antonio said, his voice reflecting the gravity of this truth. "It's not just about being cold, it's about staying alive. I've seen people die from the cold, good people who just couldn't find warm shelter when they needed it. Every winter night, you go to sleep wondering if you'll wake up." Antonio described the elaborate preparations required for cold weather survival, layering clothes, finding windproof shelter, maintaining circulation, and the constant battle against hypothermia. He spoke about the physical pain of extreme cold, but also the psychological torture of knowing that warmth and comfort existed just beyond his reach. "Summer has its own problems," Antonio continued. "The heat can kill you just as easily as the cold. You're dealing with dehydration, heat stroke, and the smell becomes even worse. Plus, in summer, all the places where you might find shade are crowded with people who don't want you there. The constant exposure to the elements had taken a serious toll on Antonio's health. He dealt with chronic respiratory problems from sleeping. Outdoors, skin conditions from poor hygiene, and various injuries that never properly healed due to lack of medical care. Getting medical attention when you're homeless is almost impossible, Antonio explained. Emergency rooms will treat you if you're dying, but for chronic conditions, ongoing health problems, preventive care, forget it. You're basically waiting for your body to break down completely. Antonio spoke about the bureaucratic nightmare of trying to access social services. The maze of paperwork, the constant appointments during business hours when you have no transportation, the way the system seemed designed to discourage rather than help people. They make it so hard to get help that many people just give up, Antonio said. You need an address to get services, but you need services to get an address. You need identification to get benefits, but you need benefits to get identification. It's like they want you to fail. The job search while homeless was another exercise in futility. Antonio described the impossible catch-22 of needing a job. To get off the streets, but being unable to get a job while on the streets. How do you go to a job interview when you haven't showered in a week? Antonio asked. How do you explain the gap in your employment history? How do you provide references when you've been out of the workforce for years? The system isn't designed for people like me to succeed. The legal system presented constant challenges that made Antonio's situation even more precarious. Simple acts of survival, sleeping in public, panhandling, even sitting in the wrong place, could result in fines and arrests that created a cycle of criminalization. Everything you do to survive is illegal, Antonio said with bitter irony. You can't sleep here. You can't sit there. You can't ask for help in this area. They give you tickets for being homeless, and when you can't pay the tickets, they arrest you. Then you have a criminal record, which makes it even harder to get a job or housing. Antonio had been arrested multiple times for what he called existing while homeless, charges like trespassing, vagrancy, and disturbing the peace. Each arrest created new obstacles to getting back on his feet, and the jail time often meant losing whatever temporary stability he had managed to achieve. I've been arrested for sleeping, Antonio said, shaking his head. Think about that. Sleeping is something every human being has to do, but if you don't have a house to do it in, it becomes a crime. They arrest you for being poor. The discrimination from businesses and institutions was relentless. Antonio described being followed by security guards in stores, being denied service at restaurants, even when he had money, and being treated as a threat simply because of his appearance. You become a second-class citizen, Antonio explained. Actually, you become a non-citizen. You lose access to the basic services and protections that society provides to everyone else. Libraries, public transportation, even emergency services. They all treat you differently when you're homeless. Antonio spoke about the particular cruelty of being poor in a wealthy society. He described watching people throw away food while he went hungry, seeing empty buildings while he slept on the street, and witnessing the casual waste of resources that could have changed his life. The hardest part is seeing how much abundance there is, Antonio said. There are empty apartments, wasted food, thrown away clothes. The resources exist to help everyone, but the system is designed to keep some people locked out. It's not about scarcity. It's about who society decides deserves help. The stigma attached to homelessness affected every interaction Antonio had with the outside world. People made assumptions about his character, his intelligence, his worth as a human being based solely on his housing status. People assume you're lazy, that you're an addict, that you chose this life, Antonio said. They don't want to hear about the medical bills that bankrupted you, the family tragedy that led to depression, the job loss that started the downward spiral. It's easier to believe that homeless people deserve their fate than to acknowledge that it could happen to anyone. After 4 years on the streets, Antonio had developed a complex philosophy about survival, dignity, and human nature. His experiences had taught him lessons about society that most people never learn, and his perspective on what really matters in life had been fundamentally altered. I've learned that the difference between housed and homeless people isn't character or worth, Antonio said. It's luck. Good luck, bad luck, the timing of tragedies, the presence or absence of support systems when you need them most. I was one medical emergency away from losing everything, and most people are too. Antonio had actually found some positives in his experience, though he was quick to acknowledge that he wouldn't wish homelessness on anyone. He spoke about the way extreme adversity had revealed inner strengths he didn't know he possessed, and how it had given him a deeper understanding of human resilience. You learn what you really need to survive, Antonio said. Not the things you want, not the things that make you comfortable, but the absolute minimum required to stay alive and maintain your humanity. It's less than most people think, but it's also more valuable than they realize. Antonio had become an advocate for other homeless individuals, sharing resources and survival strategies with newcomers to the streets. He had learned to navigate the complex social services system and often helped others access the help they needed. If my suffering can help one person avoid some of the mistakes I made or get the help they need faster, then maybe it means something, Antonio said. I can't change what happened to me, but I can try to make the path easier for others. The experience had also taught Antonio about the capacity for both cruelty and kindness in human nature. He had encountered people who treated him with shocking callousness, but also others who showed him unexpected compassion. I've seen the worst of humanity, Antonio said, but I've also seen the best. The nurse who treated my infected wound even though I couldn't pay. The restaurant owner who gave me food without making me feel ashamed. The stranger who handed me a coat on a cold night. These people reminded me that good still exists in the world. Antonio had recently been connected with a transitional housing program and was cautiously optimistic about the possibility of getting back on his feet. He knew the challenges ahead, the job search, the adjustment to indoor living, the ongoing struggle with trauma and depression, but he also knew he had already survived the worst. I'm not the same person who became homeless 4 years ago, Antonio concluded. I'm stronger in some ways, more grateful for small kindnesses, more aware of what really matters. But I'm also damaged, scarred by experiences that no human being should have to endure. Recovery isn't just about getting a house. It's about healing from the trauma of being treated as less than human. Antonio's story serves as a powerful reminder that homelessness is not a personal failing, but a systemic issue that affects real people with complex stories. His experiences reveal the urgent need for compassion, understanding, and structural changes to address the root causes of homelessness. The next time you see a homeless person, Antonio said, remember that they're someone's child, maybe someone's parent, definitely someone who once had dreams and hopes just like you. They're not there by choice, and they're fighting battles you can't imagine. A smallest act of kindness can mean the difference between despair and hope. If this story opened your eyes to the realities of homelessness and reminded you of the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of their circumstances, then please subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this every week, real accounts of struggle, survival, and the human spirit's capacity to endure even the most difficult circumstances. Hit that subscribe button and join a community that believes in compassion, understanding, and the fundamental worth of every human being.